Hello, and thank you for joining me for another panel discussion today. It's great to have so many of you still tuned in. In this one, we are going to be discussing mental health and how to really take care of yours. It's obviously been something that has been a very hot topic lately and very much kind of in the public eye, in the news, on your Instagram pages, all over the place. The pandemic and the restrictions that have been in place as a result have not really just taken their toll on people's bodies, but also on their minds as well. So it was a subject that we didn't feel that we could miss out of the conference this year, and it was something that we felt that we absolutely had to cover. I personally don't actually know anyone who hasn't suffered to varying degrees with something mental health related this year, and as I say, it is being talked about a lot more. So slowly, I think that stigma is starting to fade. However, there is still a really long way to go, and that is why we are here, and that is why we're going to keep talking about it and keep ensuring that it's a key part of the conversation across the board. The retail industry has obviously felt the effects more than probably any other industry in the UK of this upheaval that we've experienced in the last 18 months. We've had people furloughed, there's been redundancies, we've had a lot of different experiences across the different types of places you can work in the retail sector, from warehouses to offices to shop floors. Everybody's kind of experiencing different things, and it is impacting mental health. So for the next 20 minutes or so, myself and these fantastic panelists that I've got here today, Martin, Chris and Rosemary, are going to delve into this subject a little more and hopefully leave you with a few tips that you can take back to your own workplace, whatever that might look like right now and wherever that might be, to really ensure that your own well-being stays front of mind. One thing I do want to do, though, before we go into the discussion, is quickly plug the wellbeing section that we do have on the Be Inspired website. We're running this in association with the Retail Trust, who are obviously huge in this area, and there are loads of resources there. So if anything today that you hear, you feel like you'd like to pick up on a bit more, please do check that out, because there's lots of great resources there. Anyway, let's go into the discussion. And the first question I would like to ask is a simple one, but it is one that many of us do gloss over a little bit. And I'm hoping that we can start this panel in a really honest way and kind of encourage you guys to open up. I want to ask, how are you? I'd like to ask, really, how are you? How has the last year or so been for you, and kind of where are you at the moment personally? Chris, you are the first person I can see on my screen, so I'm going to go for you first, if that's all right.
Thanks, Jade. I'm well, thank you. I must say I am well, as undoubtedly like everyone. There have been ups and downs over the last year, but I think my unique role has given me a real sense of purpose actually over the last year. In 190 years of the Trust supporting the well-being of those working in the sector, I would say we've never been more relevant than we are now. And so I've been able to latch onto that sense of purpose, and I think it's kept me very positive over the last year. But I think, like everyone, of course, there have been ups and downs, and I think it's important that we talk about these things. Your question, of course, is not an unusual one now. I think for the first time, potentially, certainly in my social life, we start almost every conversation with that question now, asking someone how they are. And probably for the first time ever, we actually mean that question. And I think probably for the first time ever, the vast majority of us are probably answering it in an honest way as well at any time, which I think is great. So the fact that we are being more open and we are able to talk about it again, I think has been incredibly helpful, certainly for me and for those around me as well over the last year.
I completely agree. I think that the fact that we're talking about it more is fantastic. And I'm going to do another shameless plug actually to our Retail Connected event, where I spoke to Dr. Alex George, who's the mental health ambassador for the UK. And he said, asking how are you is key, and then asking twice, because people might not always give that honest answer that first time. And I think that's really good advice as well. Martin, you're next up on my screen. So can I come to you? How are you, and how has the last year been for you?
Yeah, thank you. I'm well. A similar narrative to Chris's answer, really. I have a disability, so personally and professionally, I've worked in the disability space. Not so much mental health square on, but I think there are a lot of issues around sort of higher incidence of impacts of mental health with the disabled community. I think, as we know in general with COVID and the pandemic, there's been winners and losers across the board in terms of business as well. So I was already planning to start this comms agency to connect brands with disabled people prior to the pandemic. And then when the pandemic struck in, that sort of Chris was saying about the relevance, we found that brands really wanted to be more sort of social and inclusive, and like the whole diversity and inclusion agenda has been a hot topic. So the business that I started has been really in high demand and booming, which I'm very grateful for. But I did sort of last, I suppose, autumn time, the impact of shielding and all the lockdowns started to take its toll. And I did end up deciding to seek a bit of support more preventatively than because I was in a particularly bad state. But it was actually a really amazing experience to have some therapy sessions and just talk about the pandemic and talk about life having been disabled and all the sort of things that's brought to my life. And it just was a really great thing that I think someone said that we look after our physical health with brushing our teeth and going to the gym, but we don't think of looking after our mental health in quite the same way. And it was quite empowering and liberating to actually take some steps to do that the last year.
I think that's such good advice as well. The idea of thinking about mental health like that, and thinking about the preventative measures that you can take to look after it, frankly. And actually, it's almost baffling to think that we do brush our teeth, but we wouldn't think of mental health in perhaps the same way. And hopefully, with conversations like this and the fact that we are opening up the dialogue a bit more, then hopefully that will change. Rosemary, can I come to you? How are you at the moment? And I think I saw your cat just a minute ago. How is your cat too?
Oh, he's a very important part of my mental health strategy, actually. He doesn't care what you've been facing through the day. He doesn't care what job you do, how much you earn. He still needs stroking, and that really helps to take some of the heat out of the stress sometimes. So yeah, it's good to have him around. But thank you. I'm well. We've been ever so lucky in my arena. So in logistics, in DIY, we've been tremendously busy over the last 18 months, which I guess alleviates some of the what might happen to me kind of worries. But that being busy lets you get busy with being busy and not take a step back and look at how we are. And one of the things that I've been really proud of is how our logistics team has started talking about how they feel about stuff in a way that wouldn't have been true pre-COVID. We would always have been in that kind of it's our job to just deal with it all and fix it space. And now we talk about not only how we feel, but how our team feels and how important it is to support them to be as good as they can be every day. And we've been through some real ups and downs. We've fundamentally changed the way we do some of the things in our business, and that's given us an amazing sense of achievement, and that team collaboration has been wonderful. But some days we've been facing things that have felt nearly impossible, or just another challenge when we haven't got space to pick up anymore. I've had some relationships that have been stretched quite hard by the level of pressure that we've been under, and that's let me explore some ways that I deal with stuff in a way that I've never had the opportunity to face into before. So it's been a journey of learning about myself and my team and the other people I work with, and there's been some awesome patches and some quite difficult patches too.
Thank you for that candor. I think that's really important to hear, and I think a lot of the people that tuning in today will be able to relate to that, certainly, in the sector. Rosemary, I'd like to stay on you if that's all right, because obviously when we spoke in advance of this panel, and you've kind of alluded it to there, you talked about how your team frequently experience, I've got the quote, relentlessly stressful situations, which, I mean, brings me out in a sweat just reading it. Can you tell me a little bit more about this and kind of what you do sort of practically to work together to really look after one another as a team?
Yes, absolutely. And in logistics and fulfillment, there's a shape of character that kind of enjoys having a certain level of kind of pressure to deliver, being needed, I guess. And so we quite enjoy some level of excitement, but it's when it goes further than that sweet spot, I guess, is when it gets more of a concern to manage. And we've been running our network at its peak outbound, which would normally be 4 weeks a year. We've been running that at peak outbound for 18 months in a row. And so normally there'd be an ebb and flow of effort that would give people time to recover. And really, mostly when we've got something nailed and settled into a routine of working, there's just been a new challenge to face into, and we haven't had that opportunity to pause and take a bit of a break. And so it's been really important that we've noticed in ourselves and in our colleagues when people are really enjoying delivering and when people are just feeling a little bit overwhelmed, and whether that's as simple as asking if they're okay and them pausing, or going right through to, if you've got too much on, let me help you prioritize it with you. It's been really important to take more notice of each other than we perhaps normally would. And I'm pleased at how the team stepped into that and made the effort to look after each other in a way we probably wouldn't have as much before.
That's really nice to hear. I think it's something that anyone should take away from this, is kind of checking in on your teammates is a really nice kind of thing that everybody should be doing. We actually had a self-care session that we did for our Senior Leadership Academy yesterday, and we talked about how sometimes it can almost be anxiety inducing in itself to try and schedule in self-care moments or those kind of like walks or things like that, but just the simple act of somebody else saying, hey, do you need to take a break, can sometimes just be the thing that you need. So that's really interesting and nice to hear that you're all supporting each other, and hopefully that's something that we can continue even as we come through this. Chris, I'd like to come to you now, because obviously the Retail Trust have done some amazing work in this space over the last year, and you kind of alluded to the sort of history of the things that you've been working on, and you really are supporting the sector through those ups and downs. Can I ask, what is the feeling across the retail sector right now as the world kind of begins to open up again? The vaccine program is obviously progressing. What is the feeling in relation to mental health? Are things looking up? Do you think, there is a positive vibe within the sector, or are there still some pain points that remain? I'd like to get kind of a bit of an overview from you.
Sure. So I think the first thing to say, that it's been a very, very tough year for everyone in the sector, whether whether you are essential or deemed non-essential retail. There have been different pressures on you, but they've all combined to make things incredibly tough. And I take my hats off to everybody who's worked in the sector. It's been, I think, the retail industry has responded quite extraordinarily. And the leadership of the retail industry, I think, has really stepped up as well and ensured that mental health and the wellness of their colleagues has really taken a forefront place within the industry. That said, though, things, it has been a tough year. A piece of research that we've just done showed that UK retail workers are suffering amongst the lowest levels of mental well-being of any employee group in the last year. I think that we've seen we've seen 84% of retail staff that we surveyed had said that their mental health had deteriorated over the pandemic, and sadly, about a third of those had gone on to create long-lasting symptoms. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, just to address those issues. looking forward, as stores have reopened, there's definitely been a bump. I think people are optimistic as stores start to reopen, people get back to work, customers start coming through the doors again within the industry. But my fear is that this is maybe just a blip, and we've still got some challenges ahead of us. There's still a great deal of anxiety, I think, within the industry about what's going to happen in the medium term around a number of retail brands. We've got a huge number of economic challenges, a lot of the structural issues that we've seen in the sector over the last year. The sort of lasting structural impact on the industry hasn't been worked through yet, and people understand that and know that. So, and they're very fearful for their jobs. And financial stress is really one of the primary drivers of poor mental health within the industry as well. Now, that said, mental health has taken a really prominent place within the industry and the conversation with the industry now. And I think our call to action for the leadership of UK retail is not to let that slip. As stores start to reopen, as pressure comes back on to get sales, to drive profits, to claw back some of the lost income of the last 12 months, we really need to keep the welfare of our people right at the top of the people agenda going forward as well. One of the big issues I think that we've seen is an increase in pressure on middle management. I think some 90% of middle managers that we surveyed said that they'd seen an increase in mental health issues with their staff. But a vast majority of those had felt that they were under-equipped to deal with those. And whilst the conversation about mental health is a very positive thing, that it's right at the top of the agenda, in a way, it is actually increasing the issue with some people, because they feel then under pressure to take on another set of skills in terms of leadership that they're maybe not well equipped to deal with, alongside the normal line management duties that they would do. There's suddenly this duty of care to potentially hundreds of people under that they are leading to look after as well. And these are very new issues for them. So we've seen a big rise, fortunately, in the amount of training that we're doing in the industry. But again, I think that one area that I would say that the sector needs to really focus on is that how do you support those middle managers? How do we get the right training into them so that they can support their staff, but actually take away some of the pressure that they're feeling about suddenly having to deal with this increase in issues around mental health. But secondly, just because it's more prominent, they are much, much more aware that they've got to suddenly deal with this stuff alongside their other duties as line managers.
I think that's a really interesting one, and something that certainly came out of the event that I was mentioning yesterday, actually, that I mean, if you are a middle manager watching this and you do relate to the things that Chris is saying, then please do reach out, and we'll do our best to put you in touch with Chris or whoever relevant, because I think it's something that you don't necessarily think of. You think of the business as being the man kind of thing. They've got to sort out the problem, they've got to have a helpline, whatever. But actually, when you think these are real people, real line managers who need that support as well, it's a really good point to make. Martin, I'd like to come to you next. Obviously, the title of this discussion is we're talking about beyond the positive Instagram posts, and you obviously represent a number of social media influencers, so I kind of want to move the conversation over to that now, because I think we all consume quite a lot of social media nowadays. And certainly, I mean, I'm speaking from experience, since the pandemic lockdown, there's not been anything open. I have spent days endlessly scrolling through Instagram and the like. How far do you feel that talking about it openly helps? I mean, we've talked a lot about that over the course of this panel, but are we in danger of doing it too much? For example, I've seen the phrase toxic positivity used quite a lot in relation to certain types of social media posts. And as somebody who represents a number of social media influencers, how would you advise we kind of strike that balance between talking about it, but ensuring that people don't feel pressurized to feel a certain way? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts really. I mean, obviously it's one of those that the balance is a very difficult one to find, that exact middle ground. But I think there's clearly extremities. And so when we talk about that toxic positivity and an influencer, any person where the profile online is just everything's fine and great, and they're presenting this perfect life. Even if that's an authentic story, there's still that image that it's putting out to the world, that's what we all should aspire to do, when actually we're all going to have individual goals and dreams and preferences. So I think that one of the key parts of social media and Instagram is that word authenticity. And so as long as a person is more being true to themselves, I think that's probably where we're going to find that right balance. And then I think on the flip side of the toxic positivity, there's so much need to speak about mental health, but I think there's also that is Instagram the best and only place to talk about that? Like, it's good to show the world this is a real problem, particularly with the pandemic, and that there's a lot of help out there and there's a lot of support, and ultimately to overcome the stigma, because I think unfortunately there is still a stigma about mental health as well. So I think it's sort of those two extremes have downsides, and we just want to try and get somewhere in the middle. But again, as I say, it's that individual influencer coming from a place of authenticity and speaking their own truth, really.
I think that's such a good point. And I think you've done that yourself. I mean, even just over the course of this panel, by opening up, I think that's the key, really, isn't it? Is speaking your truth, I think, as long as you're doing that and not kind of purveying this kind of, like I say, toxic positivity. The next question I'd like to ask to you all, you're all leaders within your own remits, and you've all got high levels of responsibility. Can you all share with us, if you're happy to candidly share, what you personally do to look after your mental health, and hopefully people can take away some tips? Rosemary, can I start with you?
I think, yes, absolutely. So I do some of the things that are a little bit like the mental health cliches. So sometimes I need to make myself a bit of a space, and that might look like a bath or reading a book or something. But I think probably the thing isn't the important thing. It's noticing that you need something and making the space to do it. And so, some days that might just be ringing my mum and telling her how bad my day's been. And so it's probably trying some things and finding the things that work for you, so that you've got quite a few tools in your toolkit, so that you can then pick the one that supports you at the moment that you need to support it. So I've fairly shamelessly tried an awful lot of different things, and there's some stuff that I know I don't click with. So I know yoga is a wonderful way of feeling good about yourself, but for some reason it doesn't do it for me. So I've stopped trying. And I choose some other things that just work for me. And it's probably giving yourself the time to understand yourself enough to know how to look after yourself.
I have to say, I agree with your assessment of yoga. It's never worked for me either. There are other things that float my boat, and yoga has never been one. Martin, can I come to you? What do you do when you need to look after your mental health? What's your go-to?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of coming back to that point we're saying about the personal preferences. So it is about trying different things and finding the right tools and strategies that work for you as an individual. But personally, for me, I think self-awareness is one, just to realize if you are having one of those days, that's fine, and not to judge yourself negatively. So there's then some things around like gratitude and compassion. Those sort of practices are really important. I think another one is about routine. So particularly with work-life balance, trying to have some semblance of routine and work-life balance. And the last one for me, obviously, the pandemic and the virus did create a lot of negative impact on the disabled community. And after a while, watching the news was not a positive experience. So it was sort of that almost limiting the things you can't control and having control, like having the daily dog walk and getting fresh air, was something for me that's been really, really great.
Yeah, I've heard so many people say fresh air, and I think that's one really great thing about the last year. As soon as the government said you're allowed to walk once a day, that was it. We were all going out on a daily walk suddenly. I mean, I don't think I'd ever done ever actively tried to go out on a daily walk before. I don't have a dog, so but suddenly I found myself going on a daily walk, and I think that does make such an impact for sure. Chris, finally, can I come to you? What's your sort of go-to mental health tip?
Sure. So I guess a couple of points. So the first is I couldn't agree more with Martin and Rosemary that giving yourself space to try and understand yourself is super important, and then being forgiving enough of yourself to find the time to do the things that you enjoy doing, I think is incredibly important. My second point was I think I'm incredibly lucky being in an organization that talks mental health every single day, all day. It really allows you to understand that we are all having a really normal reaction to a very, very abnormal situation. That's a phrase from our lead trainer, Andrea, who's been brilliant across this pandemic. But I think it's so true. Whatever you're feeling, whatever when you're down, when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling anxious, these are really, really normal reactions to an extraordinarily difficult situation. And recognizing that this isn't you. We are all doing these things, and again, being forgiving enough of yourself to realize that, I think is super important. And then the third thing, I think, which is probably the hardest, I think, for all of us, is that I would just really encourage everyone to talk about it. So as well as it being important for us to ask questions of other people, I do think it's super important for us to keep this this on the agenda for when you're struggling, is to reach out for help and talk about it, and have the courage to put your hand up and say, do you know what, I'm not okay today. I'm really not. And that is quite a leap. And I know it's going to be very uncomfortable for people, but I think it's so important if we are to really, really normalize the conversation around mental health, and that as many of us as possible have the courage to do that.
I think you're right, Chris. I think knowing who those people are that you can trust and feel safe with to have that conversation is so important. And I think you can worry about burdening other people, but actually when the roles are reversed, it's quite a privilege that somebody feels that they trust you enough to share how they feel with you. And I think to just remember that is really important. Yes. when you're looking at how do you have those conversations with somebody.
I think that's really good advice, and a really excellent note to end on. And actually, as you were talking, Chris, I was thinking, Martin, you mentioned the teeth brushing. No one's scared to tell anyone if they've got a toothache, right? I mean, I was talking to one of my colleagues today, and he's going to the dentist, and he said, I've got toothache. No one's afraid to talk about that, and we need to treat mental health the same way. I think that is definitely a conclusion I've come to over the course of this discussion. And like you say, just talking about it as much as possible, I think is... I mean,
absolutely, Jay. Look, 1 in 4 of us will suffer some sort of clinically diagnosed mental health condition, but 4 in 4 of us, that's every single one of us, has mental health, and that's where we've got to get to with this, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant note to end on. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Martin and Rosemary, for joining us today. Really appreciate all your views, and hopefully everyone watching will have taken something away from this. As I said before, we have the Wellbeing Hub on the Be Inspired website, so do check that out. And if there is anything that you've heard today that has triggered anything, then please do get in touch, and we will make sure that you are in contact with the right people. Thank you all for joining us today, and I will hand back to Ria now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.